how can we not spend a little bit of time talking about Houston men's basketball, given what they have done so far, and given that the Big 12's entire hopes and dreams of retaining the best conference in men's basketball title is resting on the Cougars' very broad shoulders. So very excited to have our good friends Sam and Bobby of the Scott and Holman podcast, the #1 Houston sports podcast there is, period. End of story. There's a reason we have them in the network, because there's no one else. Fellas, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. It's been too long since we've chatted. It's been too long since we've had you both on. So we're going to talk about, obviously, the men's team. I do want to get your thoughts toward the end of the show on the women's team and the hire that they have made. You guys, as always, I always like to say, all of our shows do a great job. You guys do an incredible job of covering every single aspect of Houston athletics. I mean, I don't know any more vocal supporters of the women's tennis team. You guys are out here talking track and field and cross country. It is always impressive the amount of knowledge you guys have about every single sport. I used to do that, and then I had 3 kids, and how committed and devoted you are to making sure that all those programs are given due coverage by the Scott and Holman podcast.
Hey, those athletes in those sports as well have Houston across their chest. They are as much a part of that athletic department as the football team or the basketball team. So they deserve the same amount of coverage. They work just as hard as our football team, as hard as our Final Four basketball team. Those ladies and gentlemen are out there every day grinding what they're doing. I think they deserve a little bit of shine. Look, we also know what people listen to in basketball when they're in the Final Four tends to get a lot more coverage than a baseball team that isn't doing as well. But those guys are still out there working. The fans should at least still be supporting them as well.
Wholeheartedly agree. Nice Whataburger cup. We can get some product placement here. Maybe they want to advertise with us. I wouldn't say no. And they can literally just pay me in patty melts. That's fine. If you want to pay me in patty melts and make the Monterey permanent edition, I would be perfectly happy with that. All right, so let's
I was going to say, same holds true for me.
Yeah, it's good.
I want taquitos.
See, just give me the I want the jalapeno cheese biscuit. Give me the sandwich. Let's. I live in central Arkansas, and there's a Whataburger in town. And of all the places I thought would get a Whataburger early in Arkansas, it was not here. And there is one. And I am bound and determined to keep them in business so they do not leave, even if it is the other side of town. And it's all relative, but like other side of town, even in a small town, still like all the way over there.
Yeah.
We're here to talk about Houston basketball because the Cougars are in the Final Four. Absolutely incredible run by Houston. The toughest run of any of the teams who are still left in this tournament. Facing off against the 16, facing off against the 8, facing off against the 2, facing off against the 4. Like, it is the toughest run of everybody. No upsets along the way to bail Houston out in any way, shape, or form. And look, there have been close calls. Obviously, a tough game against Gonzaga, a tight game against Purdue, blowing out Tennessee in the Elite Eight. Certainly not a bad thing to see. Like, it's not the first time that Kelvin Sampson has led the Houston Cougars to the Final Four. But where does this run, with plenty more to come, fingers crossed, where does this run rank for you guys so far, just kind of in what we've seen from Houston Cougars with Kelvin Sampson at the helm so far?
I would have to say it's his best performance, and he's had, like you kind of alluded to, a lot of competition there. There's been a lot of really good teams pretty much since the 2017-2018 team. This fan base has been treated to varying degrees of very, very good basketball teams. But I think what separates this team, I mean, there are multiple things that separates this team, but I think what primarily separates this team from a number of very good preceding teams is the offensive ability. Like, this has been a very, very good defensive team for a while, for going on almost a decade now. But the ability to just simply put the ball in the basket, like, there have been Cougar teams previous to this one with good scorers, Marcus Sasser, Quentin Grimes are both first-round picks. Quentin Grimes was our first, I think, post-Phi Slam Jam. I don't know. It's hard for me to say. All-American. But for those teams that they were on, they were largely the high-level offensive threat. Jamal Shed last year is your creator and also a go-to offensive guy. You saw when he went down the Sweet 16 game against Duke last year how much that drastically affected what Houston Cougar men's basketball could do. Which isn't to say that any of the key guys on this year's team could go down with an injury and it wouldn't have an effect, but this year's team is almost like a hydra in that you cut off one head. Like LJ Cryer has a bad game against Purdue, and not to say it doesn't matter, because if LJ Cryer has a good game, I think that's a lot more of a stress-free experience. You don't need Milos Uzan to make a bucket very late in that one. But also you had Milos Uzan have a fantastic game in that one. Emmanuel Sharp at times. LJ Cryer didn't have a vintage game against Tennessee. Didn't matter. You had Sharp and J1 Roberts, Terrence Arsenal off the bench. Like, it's not just that this is a very, very good offensive team. It's the best three-point shooting team left in the tournament. And that, at times this year has been the best in the entire country, which is not that there haven't been good shooters in these teams, but it's kind of wild to say, like, hey, like Houston Cougar basketball actually good at like putting the ball in the basket. I think that's the differentiator, and also the fact that the key contributions can come from so many key guys. Is it most often going to come from LJ Cryer and Emmanuel Sharp and J1 Roberts? Yes, but it's not exclusively coming from those guys. That there's an 8-man rotation, and all 8 of those guys on a certain night can positively affect winning, can help get the Houston Cougars from point A to point B to win a basketball game. And that's the reason why this team hasn't lost in regulation, but for an early November game against Auburn at the Toyota Center. Like, that's, you don't get that without having a 1 through 8 that can contribute like this team's 1 through 8 has.
Yeah, I think, going back to the original question of, is this your favorite Cougar basketball team to make it this far? I think in terms of talent, I don't know if this is necessarily our most talented team, but I think it's our best team. But if I'm going back to talk about, kind of fun Cougar teams that kind of mean a lot to me, that 2018 team, that was the first to go back to the NCAA tournament. I think this year's team runs them off the court, right? In terms of pure talent, if they had to play that team one-on-one, I think that team doesn't lose, or I think that team doesn't beat the current team. I think the current team is better. But man, there was something about making the tournament for the first time. The heartbreaker versus Michigan. You're taking in the Sweet 16, having not been in the tournament for a while prior to that. You're taking a team in the Sweet 16. They required a buzzer beater to beat you. It was an absolute heartbreak. But that 2018 team really set the standard for where the expectations for this program were going to be.
You raise a lot of really good points, especially Sam, that when I'm looking through the tournament, kind of box score reading, right? Like, that's one of the things that's really stuck out to Houston for me, is someone able to step up, right? You know LJ Cryer is going to be the guy most nights. You know you're going to get good stuff from Emmanuel Sharp. But if something's off with one of those two, you have Uzan to step up. You've got Roberts to step up. You've got other guys that you know you can rely on. And to truly shut Houston down, no one's done it so far this year, because there's too many guys to try and stop. It's not we can just focus on one guy. The other thing that's key to think about here for Houston, and knock on wood, we know the tournament and injuries have been the thing that has derailed Houston's runs, is some key important player going down either in the tournament or preceding the tournament that has obviously affected what they were able to do. That I will sit here and tap on my wooden desk the entire time we talk about this if we have to. But like, the team is healthy. It's got the depth to really withstand any sort of issues. But you're at the point now where there is at best 2 games left, right? It's not we have to enter the tournament this way, or we have to deal with the Sweet 16 second weekend. There's 2 games left on the schedule. That's it. We just have to get through these 2. It's nice, as someone who has enjoyed watching Houston basketball and knowing their potential the last few years and seeing them fall short because of injuries at inopportune times late in the season. To see them in the spot where it's like, all right, this is what we've been wanting to see from Houston. What happens when they're healthy, when they enter the tournament, when you've seen how good they can be? Here you are with, honestly, the best offensive depth of the Kelvin Sampson era, a healthy team, specifically to your stars, sitting here with a huge opportunity. Now, it's not going to be a tough, it's not going to be an easy final two games. I mean, the second time ever, we've had all 4 1 seeds, and it's all of the top 4 teams at KenPom. So bravo, KenPom. But I mean, it's just, for Houston here, obviously the hope is to win a national championship. But I cannot see, I feel like this is the most fun I've had. It's, second year in the Big 12, but the most fun I've had watching and following Houston in this tournament, because healthy, depth, awesome team, incredible run, tough stretch of games you've had to face. Like, this has been, I as an outsider, like, unless you're just anti-Houston, I don't know how you don't love this team this year and what they've been doing down the stretch.
Yeah, I mean, it was 3 tournaments if you go back to the 22 tournament, it didn't affect it before the tournament, but that year's team lost Marcus Sasser and Sharon Mark, who were 2 projected starters in December this season. I thought, cool story. Former Texas Tech guy Kyler Edwards, former mid-major guy Tajay Moore carry you to the Elite Eight of that season, but that kind of felt like that team ringing every bit of talent. Didn't have Marcus Sasser or Shed healthy in the 23 tournament, lost Jamal Shed in the Sweet 16 game with Duke. So yeah, it's been nice to finally see this team have a healthy run. I think we all held our breath when J1 Roberts went down hurt against Colorado in the opening round of the Big 12 tournament. And the whispers we heard afterwards were kind of just like, okay, like, he's getting rested for the remainder of the tournament, but he really could go if this was like a regular season game and the Big 12 tournament still on the line. Or, okay, well, is that program spin, or is that actually the case? And then we saw him the opening round against SIUE, and it's like, okay, like, he's fine. We're going to this tournament fully healthy. And yeah, that was really exciting. Sorry, Bobby. Let me cut you off there at the start.
No, you didn't at all. It's injuries have always been what plagues this team. And you can kind of put that to the way we run our practices, and the way that U of H runs their program is there's no days off. You're in there, you're going to work hard, and there's nothing you can do about it. And, when you are diving on the floors, sometimes stuff happens. And we've seen some minor injuries this year. If you recall, Milo Suzanne broke his nose in practice. And I think he got elbowed or he got hit in the face by a
season, yeah.
Yeah. And he was actually wearing that mask for, I want to say, the first couple of games. So, like Sam said, we're definitely holding our breath watching Wani kind of limp off a little bit. And I won't say exactly what were said on text messages, but there were lots of 4-letter words when he started limping, exchanged between my co-host and I. So, it was definitely a thing that we were worried about. And I think early in the season, before the season even started, I may have said that I was perfectly okay and would actually be kind of happy if U of H could just be a 3 or a 4 seed, but we came into the tournament healthy. I was like, sit guys, it's okay to lose a game here or there. Like, this team is built for March. We want everyone here for it. And look, we didn't even have to sit many guys. We got a 1 seed and we won the conference by 4 games, I want to say it is. So it all feels like, it really felt like this team thought they should have been in the Final Four last year. And this is kind of a revenge tour. When you started hearing that Wani was coming back, and some of the guys that were coming back were actually coming back, not going to play professional in Europe or in the NBA or the G League, something like that, it kind of raised some eyebrows like, oh, this team doesn't think they're finished. Like, this team knows there's business left that they need to do, and they're absolutely playing like it this year.
I like that revenge, because I've been wanting to mention, because you continue to bring up the Sweet 16 game in 2024 against Duke, the injury there, and here you are, you're going to face Duke in the Final Four. Pre-tournament, it's Florida Duke. Those are the 2 teams, right? Those are the teams that are going to meet in the championship game. Those are the 2 teams that can win it all. Those are the blah 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 blah. I don't know if it'll get talked about much, but how much of this to Houston fans, beyond the fact that it's a Final Four, the chance to go to the national championship, is a little bit of like, beating them is going to be awesome. Beating Duke, and if we can beat Duke with Cooper Flagg, There's that revenge factor that plays into this one. How much of that is there for you all?
I think for me, it's not necessarily that I want the revenge and to beat Duke. I don't really consider them a rival. I just want to win. Like, you could put me up against anybody, and I want U of H to win. That's my goal, is U of H to win. And would it be nice to beat what everyone's calling some of the best teams? I mean, Duke, if you look at their KenPom, I think they're the best KenPom team since like 99 or all time. Like, yeah, that would be sweet. But I'm one of the rare people who's like, I'm okay if we beat a 12 seed to get to the national championship game. Like, it's the tournament, whoever you put in front of me. If we win a national title, no one ever goes, yeah, but in the round of 32 or in the Sweet 16, you had to play a 12 seed. It's like, nobody cares. Like, you win the title, you have the trophy. I'll be able to walk into the Athletic Alumni Center and go, that's our natty, if it happens. So for me, the revenge isn't necessarily there. Would it be nice to beat? Is it fun to beat these really good teams? Do I think the Final Four is going to be an awesome Final Four just from a basketball fan perspective? Absolutely. But let me tell you, as a U of H fan, I just want to win a national title. You can put whoever you want to in front of me. Give me the national title, and I'll be A-okay.
I don't doubt it's not lost to the returning guys who played in last year's game. That's the safety, but it's also a very different Duke team. I mean, I think even on the roster, I think like Tyrese Proctor and maybe Caleb Foster were the only guys. I could be wrong. I know Proctor was for sure. I'm not even as sure on Foster, that were like rotation guys on that team. So it's a very different looking Duke team. Like, no Kyle Filipowski, obviously Cooper Flagg, Con Knipple, and those guys weren't there last year. So, and I know in preparing for them, Sampson's not going to go up there and be like, yeah, these guys beat you last year. No, they're going over the nuts and bolts of beating what right now is the best offensive team in the sport, loaded with future pros. Like, Sampson, the staff, making sure the guys know that you're going to have to play an A game to beat these guys, because you're going to have to play an A game to beat anybody who's left in the tournament at this point. Like Bobby and I've talked about on the show, like, you get pretty deep. You're either playing a team that was one of the best in the sport over the course of the regular season and early tournament, or a team that knocked off one of the best teams in the sport. You're not, like, no more weak matchups here. Like that was done after the round of 64. So I believe the guys will be well prepared for this. I don't think it's entirely lost on the guys that they're playing the same opponent that ended last year's season, but I also know, like, the preparation in that program is so good that it's not going to be just Sampson saying, like, yeah, you want to beat him because of last year, huh? Like, there's going to be a lot of work put into defeating a team that, like, obviously is a Duke team that could beat you in many ways, and a Duke team that's removed any doubt that, much as I like to clown on the ACC generally, like, you could say, like, Duke is apart from that conference being garbage at basketball. Duke is quite good, and if you needed any proof, like, the way they tore Alabama limb from last round kind of showed you that.
Yeah, the whole, like, look, there's a little bit of Duke in the ACC right now, kind of the way that Alabama and the SEC was in football for a couple of years. There was like, the whole SEC is good, and it's like, no, there's Alabama, and then there's everybody else, and you're all riding their coattails. ACC basketball this year is like, I think it was about midway through conference play, someone made the argument like, the ACC is not doing Duke any favors, but Duke's okay. Like, it worked out fine for Duke, but like the rest of the ACC was. Look, I agree. You don't need any extra. You shouldn't need extra motivation in a Final Four game against Duke, that program, to want to go in and play your best. And it is, of the two matchups, like, it's the number one ranked offense versus the number one defense, the number 4 defense versus the number 10 offense. Like, this is a marquee matchup showdown that I am very, very excited to watch this weekend. And look, I know we're sad that there's no upsets. I'm just sad because Texas Tech earmuffs kids shat the bed. And so instead of having 2 Big 12 teams in here, we have 2 SEC teams because Texas Tech just couldn't hold on to a 10-point lead. Or hit free throws, folks, hit free throws. We should have 2 Big 12 teams in the Final Four right now. It would be with 2 teams from Texas playing to be in the national championship game against each other.
I think that's kind of God looking out for the city of San Antonio, because let me tell you, if it was U of H fans and Texas Tech fans in a Final Four in a national championship game, the Alamo might be done. We might all tear the Alamo down by the end of it fighting. So
Remember, the
I
Alamo
think,
will have very different meaning after 2025
Yeah.
than
yeah.
before. No. It would have been incredible. Look, okay, so obviously it's a huge game. We're not players and coaches, so we can have hypothetical conversations about the future. Looking at Houston, let's look ahead. They get past Duke. They're in the national championship game. Obviously, you've played Auburn already this season in a very close loss. Not played Florida. Who do you think you would rather see Houston go up against, either because of matchup or just because that team?
I'm making Sam go first on this one. Sorry, bud.
You're good. I'm gonna say Florida, just because Auburn has seen. I mean, I think this Cougar team, and this is something Bobby and I've talked about in the show. This Cougar team is extremely different than they were in early to mid-November, which doesn't say they were a bad team in early to mid-November, but I mean, teams grow over the course of a season.
Yes.
Miles Uzan, I think, is the exhibit A of that. He got into foul trouble a lot early, and it's been a long time since he's like had a major game where he was in foul trouble. But that Auburn game, he went out at about 8-9 minutes left with 4 fouls. And it was just like, it was very clear that early to mid-November, U of H had nobody else who was remotely capable of handling the ball over an extended period of time against a good team. So I think we would do better against Auburn this time, but I would still take Florida just because that's a team that hasn't seen the Cougars before, and because I think, believe it or not, as great as Janai Broome and Chad Baker-Mazara, Denver Jones, the frontline veteran starting guys are for that team, Dahad Pettifer terrifies me. He torched the Cougars, this little guard who just can heat up and just hit a shot from anywhere. And as much as Janai Broome and other guys, mainly Janai Broome, had good games against Cougars in Houston in November, Dahad Pettifer was if you look at like what player was the difference between the two teams winning and losing this game, it was Dahad Pettifer. And as much as Florida has guys who could score the ball really well, I mean, Florida's gotten this far. So Florida is a team that's very good and doesn't have many obvious weaknesses. Florida was also very close to going out against Texas Tech, a team that the Cougars played very closely 2 times. So acknowledging that both of those opponents would be very challenging and that I wouldn't mind facing either if you guaranteed me a spot in the title game, I would say Florida. Auburn has this team of destiny vibes, and just the number of guys they have who could beat you, even though they didn't look as good in March. It's kind of like the Cougars. Like Auburn reminds me of the Cougars in that, like, they haven't won some games with style points recently, but they're a veteran team that just knows how to win basketball games. They've been here before. So I'm going to say Florida, but again, acknowledgement that either of these teams is going to be a challenge if you get to them.
Yeah, I think for me, I would take Florida as well. Maybe for a little bit different reasons. U of H, let's be honest, while a very good offensive team this year, probably the best one that we've ever had, it's still the worst of all the teams remaining in the Final Four, right?
Mm-hmm.
Duke's 1, Florida's 2, Auburn's 3, we're 10, right? And so for me, I look at who's got the better defense, and I would say Auburn has the better defense. Auburn really makes me go, just like I said on our podcast, that the Tennessee game was like the Spider-Man meme where they're like pointing at each other versus Tennessee. I get the same vibes out of Auburn. And that game that we played them earlier in the year, while it was close, you still took a loss. And I do think our team looks radically different than it did second game into the season. Florida just doesn't have as good of a defense. It's not by a ton, but you kind of look at some KenPom ratings and things like that, and Florida is the worst defensive team left in the Final Four. So I would prefer our offense that can get anemic at times to face the worst defense of the two.
I think those are all fair points. I mean, I tend to lean towards, if I get a rematch, I'm going to favor the team that lost the first time, especially in games that are close, especially in games where you feel like the two teams are fairly evenly matched. Of Florida and Auburn, Auburn's the number 3 offense, number 8 defense. Like, I feel like you give Kelvin Sampson another shot at a team and you give Houston another shot at Auburn as an improved Houston team. I would favor Houston in that game. Florida to me is more of the gamble, because you could say they haven't seen Houston. You haven't seen Florida. Houston has as much experience against Florida as Florida has against Houston. So it becomes a little bit more of a toss up. And I just mentally, I rematches, I lean toward a team that lost first game, unless it was just, a complete mismatch kind of game. I'm going to lean towards the team that lost the first time in the second match. But again, this is purely hypothetical stuff. Obviously, we're all going to be keeping a very close eye on it. I'm thrilled for this weekend. All of the Big 12's hopes are now riding on Houston. I'm like, Big 12 fans, you can, like, you don't need you do not want an SEC team cutting down the nets. Not this year. Not with all of the narrative and all of the greatest conference of all time nonsense. And now they have 2 teams in the Final Four. Good job, Texas Tech. I'm like, part of me feels bad, but also like, don't do that. And don't make me, you guys don't make me root for Duke. Like, I don't, Houston, don't make me root for Duke to beat an SEC team. Okay. Don't make me do that.
We will try our hardest.
We'll do our damnedest.
I don't want to do that. So obviously huge games this weekend we're keeping an eye on. Before we let you guys go, we do need to talk about the women's side. New head coach has been hired. Former 3-time SEC Coach of the Year, Matthew Mitchell, used to be the coach at Kentucky, retired. I'm using air quotes because he came out of retirement, basically because his wife had so much money he didn't have to coach anymore. I guess the itch has returned for him, and now he is back as the head coach of the Houston Cougars. Definitely not a name any of us, until that name was released as a candidate, anywhere on the radar. So it's a very interesting hire because he's had success at Kentucky while he was there, a lot of success in the SEC. This is interesting because it is Eddie Nunez's like first hire. This is his first hire. It was very out of left field. No obvious Texas connections. What are you guys' thoughts on this hire for Houston women's basketball?
I think it's really, really interesting. Like, I think we saw probably the same thing you did a couple days before the hire came out, that the finalists were UTSA head coach Karen Aston, who was probably, Bobby, I would say accurately, like our 1 or 1A choice for the job.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And Matthew Mitchell. And it was like, Matthew Mitchell. And I did the research. I was like, wow, this guy, this guy, I think, including the 2020 COVID tournament that didn't happen, would have gone to 10 tournaments. I think went to 9, actual 3-time SEC Coach of the Year, like you said. Well, obviously the circumstances are very different, and this is a high standard to put on someone. So I'm not guaranteeing the last 11 years that Kelvin Sampson had here. I'm kind of tipping my hand with what I'm going to say here, but it reminded me of Kelvin Sampson in that I remember at the time that we hired him in 2014, it was just like, okay, under no normal circumstances, this guy even sniffing our job. Like, we have to, under unusual circumstances, he's come here, but also it could be a revolutionary hire in that, like, this is somebody with higher expectations than anyone that's been around this program in a long, long time. I don't think it's fair or realistic to expect a carbon copy of his 13, 14 years at Kentucky, because quite frankly, if he has a good 2 or 3 year run, there's a good chance he is in the mix for, a bigger conference job. Like, I think we're all adults here in the Houston fan base, and we would consider that a massive success if he gets this program back in the tournament. Because when we talked about this job when Ron Huey resigned after the season, after just quite frankly a very miserable 24-25 season, we were just like, this is the 16th best out of 16 Big 12 jobs. Like, this program needs to understand that simply getting rid of Ron Huey isn't going to fundamentally change what happens here. Like, you need greater support. You need to put the money into this program to show you're not willing to be a Big 12 doormat. And I would say there's more that needs to be done other than just simply hiring Matthew Mitchell. But that's a statement of intent. That's signaling that U of H athletics, with the full Big 12 rev share starting next season, doesn't intend to be a doormat in this league. Like, you inherited some good stuff. Like, you brought in Kelvin Sampson. I think you made a good hire in Willie Fritz. But some of your non-revenue sports have done quite well. Volleyball, the first season of the Big 12, I think really held up its end of the bargain. Track and swimming have both done quite well, as we expected they would, making the transition. But I mean, women's basketball had to kind of wear it those first couple seasons. And I think if nothing else, this is a statement of intent that U of H intends to be serious in this program, intends to not be a doormat here.
Yeah, I think for me, the biggest thing was the contract that they gave him. We saw what Huey was making, and we were looking at candidates, and the candidate from UTSA, name Sam, remind me
Karen
name.
Aston.
Yes, Karen Aston. Sorry, it just escaped me there in the second, there for a second. But Karen Aston, we were all like, yeah, we kind of are interested in her, and we had some women's basketball people kind of reach out to us, and we also just had some. You looked at what she was making and you kind of just went, that's almost like that's more than Huey currently makes. We're a university that's kind of crying poor right now, saying we don't have any money to do anything. And then his name came up and we were all like, oh, okay. And then we saw what he was making and all of us were like, wait a minute, this is different. Like, this shows that U of H is going to take women's basketball seriously. And I will 100% be honest. When we made this hire, this felt like a hire that showed that U of H was going to take women's basketball serious. But also to me, it was kind of this coach might not be here very long. I hope, I told Sam this, that I hope that we are looking for a new basketball coach in 3 years, because it means Mitchell has done a really, really good job. He's got his ties with Kentucky. He's got a lot of I wouldn't be surprised if he said, why don't I take arguably one of the worst jobs in college basketball? If I can make them respectable in women's college basketball, if I can make them respectable, a bigger program will be calling and I will be able to take over, right? Now, do I hope that he wants to stay here for the next 20 years and win game after game after game? Yes, absolutely. I would love that. But if he's gone in 3 years, it's probably because we got pretty good pretty quickly. And that's not an expectation. It's more of a hope. The expectation is that I would argue, man, I went and watched this team play TCU. Now, granted, TCU was eliminated in the Elite Eight. They're a really good basketball team. But man, this team just, I think I texted Sam while I was there. I said, I don't even know if we're in a year zero situation. We may be in like a double zero situation where it's going to take some time. Now, with the transfer portal, you hope that it happens a little bit quicker, but you have a coach who hasn't really coached a ton during the transfer portal era. So it's really kind of going to be interesting to see what he does. And I hope he's successful in that he leaves in a couple of years if he really wants to.
I believe the line is, it's a great hire. I have no idea if it'll work out. Because it is an interesting hire.
I think I said this when we hired Sampson 11 years ago. If he can't, and I'll repeat this about Mitchell. If he can't succeed here relative to, I think what's a real, having the Final Four in 3 years, that's probably not realistic. But if he can't see some kind of success here, I think the bigger problem here is Houston women's basketball, not Matthew Mitchell forgetting how to coach. And I said that about Colin Sampson 11 years ago into the job here. It's just, okay, if he can't succeed here, if he can't get something out of this program, like, maybe it's time to look in the mirror. But that's not me being negative now. Like, that's how good Matthew Mitchell is.
Well, there's so many unanswered questions, period, in college athletics. We're going to have revenue share. I'm not going to call it that, but that's what it is. You're going to have to figure out your budget based off what you have. We don't know what, and you might, I don't. You don't really know what Houston's commitment to women's basketball actually is. We can talk about how the coach was paid this. We don't know how much percentage of revenue share is going to go to women's basketball. We don't know what kind of outside influence money is coming in. I mean, one of the things that's going to determine success to me in college athletics outside of football moving forward and even men's basketball is, do you have someone independent of the athletic department who is basically funding these sports? Because that's where the best programs are going to continue to rise, is there's somebody who's bankrolling this, because your athletic department can't do it itself. How is he going to handle this NIL, immediately eligible transfer portal, revenue share era? Because his last year at Kentucky was 2020. College athletics over the last 5 years is so drastically different. We just don't know what we don't know. Again, he was retired for 5 years and took this job. not a shot at Houston. It's just there's so many we don't know in college athletics, period. And especially at programs where women's basketball is not one of your priorities, like a South Carolina or an LSU, where you just have the money to make it a priority, or even like a Baylor, that you just don't know, right? Like he might have success at Houston, but what does a good season for women's basketball at Houston look like to Houston? Not necessarily to the fan base, not necessarily, but to Houston as an athletic department and as whoever's writing the checks to make sure that he's making $600,000 a year.
I would think that came up in the interview. I would think he's not coming out of retirement, on false premises, but it's a fair question. It's a fair question, I think. I would say to me, success would be middle-ish of the Big 12, somewhere between 8th and 10th of the 16 teams right now. And to be good enough that you're facing one of the better teams in this league and not just be like, okay, well, they're gonna turn us into a pancake in this game, that, hey, like maybe Baylor comes to town and we could conceivably make a game of it. That kind of thing.
Yeah, for me, I think, the dream scenario is make the tournament every so often and consistently be at least a bubble team. And I want to see the tournament. It doesn't have to, I don't think where this team is now, I don't think an occasional tournament is, going too far and not shooting high enough. This team, would I love to be able to say like, oh, consistent competing in the Elite Eights and making it to Sweet 16s. At this point, I just want to make a tournament and at least have some excitement after I watch the men's tournament selection show and I see where men's basketball is seated. I would love to be able to tune into the women's show right after it and go, hey, we made the tournament. Nice. I know what this conference has at the top in terms of women's basketball. It's tough to compete with. You got legacy teams, right? I know TCU, you look at them and they went deep this year, but that was all money, right? They bought in,
slowing down, folks.
Yeah, I know, right? There's something about knowing yourself and having reasonable expectations. I think the occasional appearance in the tournament would be really nice. Like Sam said, consistently finishing in the top half of the Big 12. I definitely feel this is going to be a program where we are going to depend a lot on older players in terms of players that we bring in and that we build up, kind of like what our basketball program does. We don't depend a lot on transfer portal or things like that. We bring players in and develop them and make them fall in love with the city and the staff. That's what I'm really hoping comes with the basketball program. Like Sam said, maybe not Sweet 16s all the time, but if we are every 4 years making a decent run to a Sweet 16 because the players kind of develop. That's how I picture our football program, right? You historically look at U of H, it's good when a class is a group of seniors, then you kind of struggle for 2 years, then you have that incredible group of seniors that you recruited off your last one, and you keep going that way. That's what I'm hoping happens with women's basketball and their potential success.
Well, it'll certainly be interesting to watch what Mitchell does in his first season and moving forward to Houston, and keep an eye on, again, where's the money coming in? Where's the investment? What kind of investment is Houston making into sports? I am. This is more of a broad conversation. It is interesting to look at the Big 12 schools, a lot of which have really prioritized being good at as many things as they can, and trying to figure out. I don't think that's real. I don't think that's a reasonable expectation anymore, unless you're in the Big Ten or the SEC, where you've got more money than you know what to do with. And where's the money going? And they're not going to tell us. Maybe once players start getting paid, that'll be FOIA, and we'll go bug Matt Brown to see if he can pull some numbers. But otherwise, it's just something interesting to see, and so I'll be curious to keep track of it with Houston. You guys, we've gone longer than expected, but I don't really care because you guys are always a good time to talk to. So do me a favor. Obviously, Scott and Holman podcast is the show, but you guys do so much with women's tennis and with Patreon. So plug all of it, please, so that everybody knows where to go.
Well, I'm let Bobby do this because our most recent big Patreon creation was his brainchild, and let him tell you all about it because I'm very proud of this one.
Yeah, so where you can find us obviously is on all social media at SH Podcast. On Blue Sky, we are just podcast at bsky.social. And you can also find us on Patreon. We did an entire Big 12 March Madness preview with anybody who was either a bubble team, even teams that weren't necessarily on the bubble. And then
Shout out Steve of Viva La Cast on that one. It was fantastic. He was. He was. Unfortunately, as we kind of post-mortem Cincy season.
Yeah, we actually I sent it to him when they were still like kind of on the bubble, and then they lost the first game of the tournament, and I texted Sam and I was like, well, it's kind of a jerk move to uninvite him, so we'll just talk Cincy for a little bit. But we did that leading into Selection Sunday. That was a really fun thing to see where people thought they'd be seated, where people thought they'd be going. That was a really fun one. We do a lot of premium content over there. So if you are a Cougar fan listening to this and you don't listen to us, which I find kind of odd, please find us over on Patreon and all your social media.
Again, you guys do an incredible job covering all of Houston athletics. Third Ward Club.
Third Ward Racket Club. Yep.
Third Ward Racket. The racket's the one I always forget. The word racket.
We'll be, as I say, we'll actually be on site. Late next week we'll be on site at Cougars final 2 regular season Big 12 matches at Salt Lake City against the Utah Utes and Saturday morning in Provo against the BYU Cougars.
Nice.
And then before that, Tuesday, the Scott and Holman podcast will be at the women's golf tournament in Dallas. So here we go.
You guys just get around. Like it's crazy. It's awesome. All right. You guys are awesome as always. If they do the whole thing and win, we will do this again. And you guys can just, I don't care. You can do whatever you want for like 10 minutes.
I might still be legally drunk if we went over to do it.
I mean, we'll
morning.
give
if you want to do it Tuesday, that's going to be trouble.
No. We'll give it a week so you guys can like sober up and but you can do whatever you want for 10 minutes. All right. Appreciate it as always, guys. We'll talk to you again soon.
Thanks, Phillip. Appreciate you.
Yep. Great.